the next step is we're gonna saw these little babies out with our jeweler's saw. Yep, you heard me right. So we are going to start, and we're just gonna saw all the way around the outside. Now you can use this in here to support this outer edge. Ooh. Helps if your bench pin is all the way down. Hi, okay, so we have our, whoops, I've got them upside down. We've got our two little earrings all cut out. Now I'm going to do the pendant, and I'm going to skip through a lot of this because this is going to be exactly the same as cutting out the earrings. But I'm going to take the joist chins and I'm going to cut away the bulk of this metal. It will be easier to saw around, not having to mess with all that extra metal. This is a thinner metal, and it does make it a little more challenging to saw, but there's no way that you can cut that kind of detailed design out with these joist chins. But reducing the amount of extraneous metal around it will give it more stability and will help you when you're sawing it out. So I'm going to saw this away and I'll be right back. All right, now I have all three pieces, the exterior sawed out. I have not sanded this one. So what we do from this point is on your rotary tool, take one of your sanding discs, and I think this is a 220, just something coarse enough that will knock off those edges. And then if you've got a smaller grit, you can go down and make it a little bit more smooth. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on sanding those edges down. On the places where your square wire meets, you want to sand that smooth so it looks like one solid piece. Where your granules are, you might want to slightly sand under and kind of do a little bit of an undercut so that that back plate doesn't really show. You want it to anchor the granule but not necessarily stick out and show. right, so I have the earrings here, and I have the pendant, and you will notice that I have gone ahead and I have cut out 2 of the little rings. I wanted to go ahead and do that off camera just to have an example for you to see. I've also drilled in each one of these rings. That's what you do when you pierce. So our next step is we're going to drill in all of these little rings, and then we're going to pierce them out. So I'm going to continue with the pendant. Undo the bottom of your saw blade, thread it through your drill hole, let it rest at the very back, rest your saw blade, press in and tighten. Now you want to lubricate. 1 time through the lubrication is all that you need. And then you begin sawing. Now let me caution you, you're going to want to try to stay right up against that ring, but actually what you need to do is probably put it at least a saw width blade away from the ring, because you do not want to cut into that ring, and it will be very, very easy to do. Now, you don't want to stay too far away, because what we're going to do is we're going to sand off the lip or the remainder. So you don't want to have a ton to sand and work with. So get close, but not too close, because we will file and sand that away. I wanted to say that if you've noticed me having some difficulty sawing, you're right. The reason is because I chose to try 30 gauge silver. It's incredibly thin, but I thought, well, all we need is a back plate, just something to anchor all of the pieces together. I was out of the 24 gauge silver, and I didn't want to wait for a shipment from Rio Grande, so I thought I'll just go ahead and use the 30 gauge silver. Now you will notice in your tutorial and in your illustrated tutorial, I have put 24 gauge silver because that's what you need. The 30 gauge is incredibly hard to saw through. Not because it's dense, but because it's so thin that it gets hung up in the saw blade. Now, I did go down to a 6/0 saw blade, and that didn't help a lot. They're so thin, I actually was winding up breaking them. So I'm sticking with my 3/0 saw blade, but when you see me having difficulty sawing, it's because that thin 30 gauge metal is getting hung up in my saw blade, and for no other reason. You should not have that difficulty with 24 gauge. So I wanted to point that out to you guys when you see me having difficulty and you seeing the saw blade hung up in the metal. It's only because I've used super thin metal, and I would not be having this problem if I'd have used the 24 gauge silver the way I've instructed you to do. So now what I'm doing is I actually realized that if I went and sawed out the center, then I went back in the opposite direction, I could actually saw off much more of the rim. Now it is not completely flush because I did not want to saw into my ring. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into 2 or 3 of the rings that I left a really thick rim, and I'm going to saw off that rim so that's only about a saw blade width wide. I'm going to hold this up so you can see what I'm referring to. So the one that I have my blade in, see how thick that rim is, as in contrast to these up here where I went back in a opposite direction and sawed off the rim. So that's what I'm going to do now. All right, so I have all of my circles sawn out, and I'm going to continue to saw out these off camera, and then I'll be back and we will sand and finish our piece. So I have sawed out that one, but I wanted to show you that all you have to do to slip your saw blade into these circles is simply drill in the center of each one. Drill all of the holes at the same time, and it will make it very easy when you're going from circle to circle to saw them out. Now, on your little tiny jump ring, I sawed out the circle here, but this one is much smaller. So you should be able to just drill in the center of it. If there is a little rim, just take your drill bit and ream that out a little bit so that you do have a nice hole to hang your earring wire. Whoops. I'm going to saw these out and be right back.